Alright, this will be a bit of a different review of the Canon C50. I used it to the max, but let's start from the very beginning. I purchased my C50 about 6 weeks ago, and as my content is usually travel related and it's my first cinema camera, I wasn't really sure what to expect, and honestly I was quite worried that I might not like it at all. Fortunately, I had a perfect opportunity to test it properly on a real trip as my dad and brother came over to visit us here in Thailand to see our baby son and of course travel a bit. I'm genuinely proud of my dad for that because he's terrified of flying and he's never traveled this far, so this trip was a big step outside his comfort zone. And for me it became two things at once, showing my family the life I've built here in this place I now call home, while I was also figuring out how to shoot with a cinema camera for the first time, worrying that it might get too much in my way, and this video is basically what that looked like. But before we hit the road, here's how I set up the C50 and how I plan to use it on this trip. I wanted to treat it like a documentary-style cinema camera, top handle with proper mic on, zoom lenses, a simple run and gun setup that wouldn't slow the family down. So why did I even get the C50 in the first place? GAS of course. But I actually plan to get an R8 Mark II if it comes out for C-Log 2 and now IBIS to avoid corner wobbles, but when I saw Potato Jet's R6 Mark III review, the C50 looked noticeably better in the midtones and shadows, like more contrasty and dynamic, and that flat look is something I've noticed with hybrid cameras for years, and it cost me many hours color grading. So I thought, let's just go for the cinema camera. And here it is. I used it mostly with the RF 15-35mm and 70-200mm f2.8L lenses and the RF 100-500mm in this video because those lenses are stabilized while the C50 sensor is not. The microphone I paired it with is the Audio-Technica AT875R, which fits pretty well size-wise, sounds good and is quite affordable. I shot everything in XF HEVC 422 10-bit DCI 4K at 23.97 FPS with digital image stabilization on but without motion vector to avoid that locked on look. I also noticed my first two gripes with the C50 at this point. First, the screws to attach the microphone holder to the top handle could be finger screwable, just like all the others, instead of needing a screwdriver, just to fit better in smaller bags while staying toolless. And second, the screen feels pretty small, and I think it actually is a bit smaller as on other cameras. That's definitely a downer. To fix that, I recommend getting a monitor like the Fieldworld one here, which I will get to in a bit. It's not a must, I use the screen most of the time, but it makes judging your shots a lot more convenient. Anyway, now that everything was set up, it was time to start the trip. We started slow to be gentle on my father after the longest flight of his life by visiting some sites close by, like one of my favorite beachside cafes and the Hin Lek Phai mountain here in Hua Hin. There are always some monkeys to film, and I prefer to film them from a low angle when they are on the ground, so the top handle came in quite handy right away. I even managed to get some close wide angle shots, and that was definitely easier with the handle compared to how I'd usually hold my camera. It's also nice that I can start and stop recording from the handle, so I didn't waste a ton of space with shaky footage. The first dynamic range impressions were also excellent. You can, for example, see that the sun behind my dad is pretty small, but he's perfectly visible.
So, how is vlogging on this camera using the Audio-Technica microphone? It is certainly heavy, yeah, but I think that's doable. Or using digital image stabilization right now, but just the standard mode. And it's definitely not so easy when you have your son with you. it's definitely too big as a vlogging setup, yeah. But it works.
Junge, Dolly-Zoom, Alter.
Schon übelster Storyteller.
Oder?
Junge, heftig, Alter.
The next day it was time for a proper trip to show my dad a bit more of the region. We went to the famous Prayana Concave, where it already got a bit rough as we had a boat ride and a steep hike ahead of us. This was the first moment where I thought, okay, this trip might be a bit demanding, both for my dad and for me with the C50. The boat ride was already a great test for the stabilization of this camera. I used the RF 15-35mm lens there exclusively, sometimes in Super 35 mode, sometimes not, and stabilization was not an issue at all, as you can see from the shots. It got a bit shaky on the hike, but I honestly don't mind that, as a steep hike should feel a bit rough. One thing I had worried though was the size and weight for hiking, but ironically the top handle made it easier. I actually preferred carrying it that way over a strap or clip, except for whenever I needed a free hand, of course. And speaking of stabilization holding up in chaotic situations, on a separate trip my wife grabbed the camera to film me chasing a goat. She's not used to this camera at all, so she didn't even look at the screen, but the shot is perfectly usable and that bit of shake also fits the chaos of the situation. I have also been positively surprised by the 4K 120p footage in the cave, because 120p footage usually turns out quite noisy on Canon cameras unless you overexpose, but in those shots the noise was actually minimal, so I didn't even have to do any noise reduction. We ended the day with another boat ride to a scenic cave in the same area, where I also had to shoot from the boat using the 100 to 500mm lens. Of course, it wasn't easy to get smooth shots under these conditions with that lens and no tripod, but I still managed to get a few usable ones, and honestly, even with IBIS cameras, that would have been a challenge, so I'm actually quite happy with the results. The cave was also a great way to test the dynamic range again, and I was again very happy with it. There aren't many totally black parts in the shadows, and the sun again stayed decently small in most of the shots. I don't fully remember anymore, but I think I got some of those shots in Super 35 mode to enhance the dynamic range a bit, and that's a great feature of this camera. Like when you shoot in Super 35 crop mode, it reads a higher bit depth from the sensor or so, what leads to higher dynamic range. And then it got super exciting. I saw my first wild cobra on this trip. It was hidden in a small hole and I wasn't sure if it was a spitting cobra or not, so the 100 to 500mm lens came in handy again to keep some distance while still getting decent shots. And that was actually a lucky moment for my brother and father, because I had wanted to see a cobra for so many years without success, and they already saw one just a few days into their time in Thailand. We also found a perfect portrait location for my dad by the end of the day, and because he has a big passion for fishing, we went on a fishing trip on the ocean a few days later from Hua Hin, which was a lot of fun. He taught me fishing when I was a child, but back then I hadn't been patient enough, so I could never really enjoy it. However, this time was different.
When I've been a kid, Papa taught me how to fish, and I thought I forgot everything, but the moment I had the rod in my hand today, I actually remembered it, or most of it, pretty much instantly, and now I actually catch the biggest fish today.
It was also the freshest way to eat fish possible, as they cooked it directly on the boat and we were able to eat it right there. Camera-wise, I noticed on this day how much highlight headroom the C50 actually has in C-Log 2, because I only brought a 3 to 7 stop ND filter, and 7 stops at f2.8 oftentimes looked overexposed, but later on my computer I noticed that it was always fine. The fishing trip reminded me a bit of a liveaboard I did with my wife a few years ago in Komodo National Park, Indonesia. There I used a Fujifilm X-H2S, which has the most beautiful image of all the cameras I've ever shot with, and now that I look at the C50 footage, I actually find it quite comparable. Color-wise, I would still give it to the Fujifilm, but the C50 is very close behind, and the X-H2S oftentimes looked a bit too sharp, while the C50 always feels right, while giving an image that overall goes in a similar direction, plus a full-frame f2.8 zoom lens look and great autofocus. Considering that many people call the X-H2S a little cinema camera, that makes total sense. The battery life of the C50 is comparable to most cameras I've used, around 80 minutes per charge, and if you're worried about the price of Canon's official batteries, third-party ones from brands like Kingma or SmallRig already work fully with the C50, so you don't have to sell your kidneys. The 4K 120p looks great, but a bit softer as other frame rates, as it's not oversampled, so if you need the absolute best quality slow motion, I suggest shooting in 4K 60p and using AI-powered slow motion modes in your video editor, monitor to slow it down even further. 4K 120p is also not available in Super 35 crop mode, which I find a bit strange because if non-oversampled 4K 120p is possible in full frame mode, I don't see a reason why it wouldn't be possible cropped with a 1:1 readout. So I would love for Canon to add that, because it can sometimes be quite useful if you want to be closer to a subject in slow motion. And as I mentioned already, I noticed pretty quickly throughout the trips that the screen of the C50 can feel a bit small, especially when you're holding the camera from the top panel and you're naturally a bit farther away from it. Now, I didn't actually use this on the trip itself, but found it quite useful on control shoots for my videos, and that's the Feelworld P6 XL monitor. The reason I recommend it for the C50 specifically is simple. It's a 6-inch 1200 nit screen for around $200 with a built-in battery, and that brightness makes a real difference outdoors when you're trying to judge exposure. You can also load LUT files into it, so you're not staring at a flat image all day, and it can be powered via USB-C if you need longer run times, and especially when you use it on a proper rig with V-mount battery. I also have to say that I find the quality of this monitor quite impressive for the price, like it actually looks really crisp, and in this price range that's not often the case. For a camera without a viewfinder that you're often holding by the top handle, having a bigger, brighter screen on hand is generally useful, and because it's quite compact with its internal battery, it also doesn't take up much space in your backpack. So if you're looking for a quite nice yet affordable monitor to pair with your C50 or any other camera, that's one you might want to look into. Quick transparency, yes, Feelworld sent me this monitor for free, but if I didn't think it was worth mentioning, it wouldn't be in here. Of course, I also had to show my favorite national park to my family because it's perfect for spotting wildlife. Right when we arrived, we saw dusky leaf monkeys, a perfect opportunity to use the 100 to 500mm lens again. I put it on a tripod though, because shooting at 500mm while often being in crop mode is quite hard handheld. And I have to say, looking at the footage from the Super 35 crop, I'm actually surprised by how good it looks. Not just because it has a bit more dynamic range, but because of how detailed it is. With many hybrid full-frame cameras I've used, including the R5 Mark II and Sony A9 Mark III, activating crop mode means losing quite a bit of quality, which especially hurts wildlife shots with long tele lenses, but the C50 doesn't seem to struggle with that. Of course, you do get a sharper image in full-frame mode thanks to oversampling, but the cropped videos don't look bad at all, they are very, very usable. We had even more luck because we actually managed to see a sun bear as well, which I really hoped for my brother and my dad. Funny to be worried about flying and suddenly standing in front of a wild bear though. We also saw a big monitor lizard, which my father found really fascinating, but the best thing was just ahead of us. We spotted a wild leopard on the road when we drove back. But of course, as you can imagine, it was gone too quickly for me to film it. I only got a bit of footage from the dashcam of my car. That's the brutal part of wildlife. The moment you've been waiting for doesn't care what camera you brought or how much time you have. Just as it is with family visits, you can plan and prepare, but some moments just happen and you either catch them or you don't. About a week before my family arrived, I also went camping with the C50 in that same national park and captured quite a bit of lowlight footage. First, we managed to get some footage of porcupines, which were pretty adorable and didn't shoot their spines at us. Quite friendly actually, thank you. After that, I spotted a civet cat in a tree. I had already filmed one a few weeks before with the Canon R5 Mark II under the same lighting conditions, and I can only say that the footage from the C50 is a lot cleaner compared to the R5 Mark II. That doesn't surprise me, because the second base ISO of the C50 is 6400 compared to 3200 on the R5 Mark II, so obviously you get much better lowlight footage, and these shots definitely show that. I find that especially important for wildlife shots like these, because you get a lot more detail in the fur of the cat. On the R5 Mark II it became quite soft after noise reduction. As I was generally curious how the R5 Mark II compares to the C50, I also ran another test after the trip just to see which one looks better in the same shot, and I was surprised how similar they looked on the computer, because on the camera screens the C50 looked 10 times better, but on the computer the difference is neglectable. The R5 leans a bit more green, the C50 looks more neutral, but the overall look is not a big difference. They pair very well together. Back to the trip, of course my father also had to get to know my wife's family, so we did another trip to Kanchanaburi, which is a very underrated province of Thailand. I can't state enough how beautiful it is there. We stayed at a resort next to train tracks on the side of a river, which allowed for stunning views, and as you can tell, the footage does not disappoint. Perfect for a family stay. The resort itself was super nice, and I was also able to take my father to an elephant sanctuary close by, because well, if you visit Thailand, you definitely have to see elephants. I did end up worrying my dad quite a bit though when I got the obligatory shots on the train tracks. On the tracks, I also used the 7K open gate mode for the first time. It's not a feature I find super important, but 7K is definitely useful if you want to be able to crop in later, and I would rather have open gate than not, just in case. However, I found that instead of only allowing 7K in 3:2 open gate mode, it would also be nice to include a 7K mode in 16:9 or 17:9 in compressed formats, because it can sometimes save at least a bit of space, even if it's not a big difference. Oftentimes you just want some higher resolution for cropping without needing open gate. Open gate is also better for shooting anamorphic, though I do wish Canon would open the RF mount to autofocus anamorphic lenses from C-Ray and Blazer, because many creators that use this camera are solo shooters where autofocus matters, and Canon has already added anamorphic stabilization modes in the menu, so it would be a natural fit. Our trip ended in Bangkok, where we got a little bit of rain and a few drops land on the C50, which made me worry a bit because it has fans, so I wasn't sure if it's actually weather sealed or not, but I didn't have any issues, and from what I read online, it actually is weather sealed, which I find important for a camera like this because you will likely use it in rugged situations. Talking about rugged situations, one that you might encounter in Thailand is eating durian, and when you do, definitely film it. That was one part of the trip my brother and dad didn't particularly enjoy, but well, that's part of travel. You try new things and see how it goes. As my father had been quite fascinated by the monitor lizards before, we also went to Lumpini Park in Bangkok, where you can see tons of them. That was also great for another little camera test, as I was able to get tons of shots with the C50 and the 70-200 f2.8 lens there, which I absolutely love. They are super detailed and look freaking good. And despite of being in the center of Bangkok, it's a great wildlife experience, especially that monitor that caught a fish and was then chased by his friends for it. Sadly, that was already the end of the trip, but I saw it positive because it's easy to forget how lucky we are. Like, we can actually do this. 3 generations from different cultures meeting halfway across the world, being one family. And seeing my dad do this meant a lot to me. He left his comfort zone, came all this way, and gave us memories we will carry for a long time. And surprisingly, the C50 didn't feel like it was in my way at all, at least not more than any other camera would, so I'm actually quite surprised about it. When it launched, it felt like a joke to me because it didn't have IBIS. I was really worried about that and that it might be too cumbersome to carry around, but it actually fits really well on my bag because it doesn't have a viewfinder and is therefore quite flat. The footage is some of the most beautiful I've captured. As mentioned, it comes close to the Fujifilm X-H2S. The workflow is great and it carries well on trips with the top handle. It would probably not be my first or only camera just because it doesn't have IBIS, and sometimes I just want a tiny bit more stabilization from my hands on tele lenses. But aside from that, I would actually say it's one of my most favorite cameras of all time. Maybe it even is my favorite. And no, this video is not sponsored at all. I paid the full price for this camera. This is my honest opinion. And remember, there are no bad cameras anymore today. If you're happy with yours, there is no reason to switch. If you're curious why I switched to Canon from Sony though, check out this video here. And if you have any questions about the C50, let me know in the comments below and subscribe for upcoming Canon content. And of course, don't forget to visit Thailand. It's fantastic here and there are still so many things to see that you don't see often on YouTube.